Okay, it is 6 o'clock. I will call this meeting of the Juneau Utility Commission order. Roll has been taken. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Bart, second by Dave to approve the agenda. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Motion by Dave, second by Bart. Any corrections? If otherwise, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Public appearances. Here with Alex.
I am. I'm Fred Stuchinski with MSA. There's an agenda item for a potential
Okay.
discussion. Do you want to save it
Kind
till
of,
then?
I assume.
Okay.
Is it possible to move up that agenda item earlier?
Desired.
Isn't
Oh,
it?
so it doesn't have to wait so long, I guess.
Yeah. We can move it up and after the monthly business and move him ahead of, move him to 5A ahead of Lori. Is that all right? Okay. So, make a motion to amend the agenda to move item 5C to 5A.
Just C1.
Just C1,
Or do your whole. I'll do the whole thing.
do the whole thing.
I'll go last.
And we just take care of it right away. So okay, we have a motion by, a second by Ross to move that. Any questions? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Monthly business. Approve the vouchers and the checks.
I'll move to approve the vouchers and checks.
I'll second it.
Motion by Ross, second by Bart to approve the vouchers and the checks. Any questions? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Prior month income statement. Anybody have any questions at all about the income statements? If not, moving on. Council acts affecting the utility. Resolution 64, 2020, approved to amend personnel policy handbook, paid time 201, hours of work number 1. Consumption and loss.
drive is really falling off.
Yeah,
Been dry, well, kinda dry,
the only thing I can,
but lately it's been kinda wet, so.
well, I think a big part of it was Sunset View had
Oh, we still had issues with them.
issues there, so maybe then we're starting to get wrapped up. Got a new flow meter at the wastewater plant now, so that could.
Oh, that might be down, it might be more accurate than the old one.
Hopefully, or at least it's shading the right direction.
Yeah, that makes it look better, I
It's a
mean.
huge jump in the right direction.
How old was the old one? So we could have been inaccurate for a long time.
If I had to guess, it was 90s.
So,
Is that thing ever calibrated? Every year, but there's only so much they can do with those in place.
Cause that's also the design of the chute, right, where it comes through.
Right, but there was piping modifications and everything else to get this one installed properly, whereas the old one was technically not.
oh, well, that would mean, that could be an issue
part of
too.
it, yeah. They're supposed to have sections of straight pipe on each side of the flow meter.
Mhm.
So water.
The last one had a reducer bolted to the other opposite side of the meter.
Well, that'll pile it up.
How many turbines?
All right. Any other questions about consumption loss? Review totals of delinquent customers.
Disconnects will be the 16th. I don't know what the current list is at, I didn't touch base with it. I usually try not to worry because the number's probably really high right now.
We have, she just sent out on Friday the disconnect letters for 144. Disconnect letters going out. Last year at this time we had 150, so it's about the same. So we'll see how many of those come in and pay. I know there's 3 or 4 people that came in today, between Friday and today, to make payment arrangements. And we had, I think, like 4 or 5 accounts that are over $2,000 or $3,000. So I think 2 or 3 of those are ones that came in and made their payment arrangement.
All right.
It's a lot of electricity.
Well, they just don't pay their bill
Most
all the
don't get
time.
white, so we'll do that.
Well, water, but I mean, still, that's a lot of, $3,000, that's a lot of water and electricity.
They haven't paid since like September, October.
6 months in it?
Yeah.
How many, they got like 5, 6 months in it?
Yeah, would be, October would have probably been the last payment.
So most, about 10%? I think it's 300.
All right.
Jesus.
Moving on. Reports of officials. Alex.
Well, Brad wants to lead off, or?
Yes, could you just give a little
Sure. A little-
intro and then?
Little introduction, obviously everyone's familiar with the chlorine concerns we've had in our water and effects that people have been noticing. We've tried different dosages, and I guess I have I had a chart here that I could kinda show you guys all the different, we'll just pass them each way. You can see all the dosages we've tried, concentrations I should say. And I guess that's more just a visual to say, hey, we've been high, we've been low.
Alex, do you mind? Thank you.
We've tried different.
Do you have a line for complaints?
More so the reason.
Off the paper.
Yeah. The reason I'm bringing that up is just that, you know, in 2022 we had complaints. We had, you know, the complaints were always there, and it didn't necessarily change where we ran at.
Okay.
Last summer, I would say it was generally quiet, but I kind of wonder if that was just because people got sick of complaining and nobody brought it up. I don't know. You can kinda see towards the right side, the tail end. You could see we were trying to lower it down, and, that has sparked a whole nother rash of complaints, so,
I will say that I was in Beaver Dam over the weekend and drank the water there, and it tastes way worse than ours.
everything's subjective.
I mean,
yeah.
I thought I was drinking out of the doggone retention pond at the hospital. It was so bad. I was like, my goodness, this is terrible.
Fond du Lac's water is also tastes of chlorine.
And
I don't know, it
So
didn't
it's
taste like.
not a novelty, it's everybody's having problems with it.
Right.
I don't know, theirs didn't taste like chlorine, it tasted just bad.
It may go down in the summer because you got windows open. That
right, you just don't smell it, yeah.
It's just not contained in the house.
So the blue jagged line, that's the amount of chlorine you're adding?
Correct.
I
Oh,
gave
you
it,
did.
I gave
Sorry.
it.
Yes. And all this data is very generalized in that there's averages and it's very general.
And then the orange line is
What we're
you're
getting.
seeing
Correct.
at the end of the line, or
Just, yeah, throughout town, yeah.
different places, and you average them out?
Yeah,
And that
so
green line's your measurable.
the green line is what we're trying to stay above, for sure. And the blue line is where I prefer to be at, but that's sometimes not realistic. So I guess this is more just a visual representation of, if you can remember what the water tasted like over the last 3 years, and you can tell me when it was better or worse, I'm all ears.
It just seemed like for me it was sporadic.
Right.
There was no rhyme or reason when it tasted. I mean, one time I thought the one time I had it, my water softener ran that night. The next morning I tasted on the line that I have for the sink that isn't go through the water softener. I had chlorine like the next morning, but that's the only time that I ever made a connection to anything that might have been different otherwise. I don't know, it doesn't, every once in a while it seems like it tastes bad after it goes through the water softener and like in the bathroom, but there's no rhyme or reason. It's like 1 or 2 days it does, and then all of a sudden it's gone again, so it's like, not sure. I mean, we're chasing, it's like you're chasing your tail, and it's hard to.
And that's, I mean, you could kinda notice after Brad was here in October, we just said, okay, let's try going higher. And once we got above like 1.4 at the wells going in on the blue line, it seemed like it curved a little bit just from us going around smelling it. But since then, we haven't changed a whole heck of a lot. I mean, not a lot has changed in how everyone gets wrapped up in it lately, so.
So where it says complaints returned, we're actually adding less
Right.
chlorine
Because
at
we
that
were,
point?
we were on our way to, because, you know, you could see the residuals on the orange line were doing pretty well. We thought, hey, let's try to turn this down a little, you know, because it's winter, chlorine hangs on better anyway. Let's try to turn it down, and no sooner was it a few weeks into that, complaints spread like wildfire, so.
Complaints, calls to.
A lot of
some people.
Facebook, few calls, yeah.
So like
More of the
making,
calls are prompted because people see it on Facebook, and
Yeah.
then they'll call.
You know, when you get complaints on Facebook, that can go kinda.
Right. Take it with a grain of salt.
Well, not take it with a grain of salt, but it's expanded, because, you know, one person says it, then the next person jumps on it, the next person.
We also
It's not that they don't have a legitimate complaint, though.
We also have people that stop in the office when they pay their bill, they'll ask us about the water. And mention stuff at that time too.
So I guess just in general, lately, last summer, I would say we probably had the fewest complaints that I've noticed. just as far as at least it made it to me and that I noticed through Facebook, but that was when we were running just about our highest, so. Right.
Maybe go back to that, I guess, I mean, I
Well,
don't know.
that's kind of part of after this winter when we went down and we started getting complaints again, that's why you can see, we started going back up again.
Yeah.
So are you classifying that break point as like the threshold of smelling, tasting, or?
No, so
the
break point
quality?
is, and maybe you could shed more light on the chemistry of that.
Yeah, so break point, when you're initially adding chlorine, if there's any chlorine demand, it'll be consumed and you don't, break point is when you start achieving free chlorine. So there's two measures of chlorine. Alex has the residual testers to test for both of them. It's free chlorine and total chlorine. And initially when you start adding chlorine, all that chlorine is consumed and there is no free, but then you keep adding, and then all of a sudden you start getting free out, and you can measure the free chlorine. So I guess that's the gist of break point. And so there's reasons why that initially is consumed, and I guess there's a curve that defines it, and it's called breakpoint chlorination. I guess does that help with the
Yeah, it
definition?
does. So with that definition or that analysis, wouldn't we rather be between that blue and green line, or no?
So those blue and green lines are more based just for the orange line. Just trying to keep the orange line at or above those lines. So theoretically, I mean, logically, you can't get, unless the well line, the blue line is above it, you're never gonna get the orange line above it. Cause it fades when it goes into the system.
So that break point is not referencing free
It's,
chlorine, or it is?
it's saying that we're finally adding enough chlorine at this point to where what we're putting out has the ability to disinfect within the system.
And I think that's kind of represented on the graph. The orange line starts flat.
Right.
There's like no chlorine in your distribution system. Even though chlorine's being added, it has to get added to a certain level before you can get that free chlorine out to your system. And free chlorine has a lot greater ability to disinfect and kill bacteria than the total chlorine. So that's why the DNR cares about it and wants it, is because it has a higher disinfection potential. So the DNR, and I think this is part of, they're looking at these residuals and wanting to make sure that there was residuals in the system. So that's the safeguard. If there's some bacteria that gets out there, if there's a chlorine residual that kills that bacteria, and is an assurance that should be providing safe drinking water to your customers. So
Is this something new that the DNR started requesting in, looks like 23 or so? To me, was it prior to that also?
I mean, the
And then they
concept
just
of
didn't-
chlorination.
They just didn't pay attention, or what? Why
I mean,
that was more of
I
it?
think the point of collection was changed, wasn't it? Like they
Well,
were
the
forcing-
bigger issue is, yeah, they did require us to sample in different places as opposed to where they were only sampling right at the well. And we are required to have water leaving the well houses at a minimum of 0.2, and they weren't before then. So as we started bringing it up, and then they also wanted, to see that residual throughout all of town. Well, I should have put in data from before we even started any of this. I mean, we were seeing residuals at the well house of 0.04. I mean, there was zero chlorine in the middle of town. So when they start requesting you to sample out the edges of town, it just wasn't making it there. So that's what changed. And
Did it change for other communities too? I mean,
it's just that they were doing it right in the
they were
first
doing it
place.
right, okay.
I mean, the concept of chlorinating and then a municipal system having distribution sample sites and measuring those and making sure that those residuals, I mean, that's been around for decades, so that's not new, and it probably came from the 70s with the Safe Drinking Water Act. But yeah, I think specifically why this drew attention in the city of Juneau is what Alex mentioned here.
So that point two at the wells, if you had a perfect system, wouldn't you still have the same problems? I mean, we're trying to overcome the buildup on our lines and whatever with the chlorination. The aging lines, I mean, the ones that I've got the biggest complaints are the newest side of the city, or where we just replaced water main and what have you. Those seem to be the people that had it the worst. I live in an older section of town, and I listened to my neighbor right across the street complain for almost a year before I even noticed it in our house. Yeah, I even went to their house and sampled their water. Well, see, it's not as bad today, you know, while I was there sampling their water.
That seems to be everywhere that I go in person.
But I mean, is, in a perfect system, is .2 too high? I mean, with, depending upon the layout, I mean, our system is looped, to, you know, we avoid all dead ends whenever we can, naturally, one or two here or there because of the layout of the main, but, it almost sounds like that's not feasible to be able to put it out at that level and not have problems throughout the city. Is that a safe assumption?
So you mentioned perfect system. So I'm gonna give just a quick 1 to 2 minute background of what causes chlorine demand and some of the background here. So so when you add chlorine demand comes from, first of all, starting at the well. There's naturally occurring metals in a well. If there's iron, manganese, that'll consume some of that chlorine. Also, if there's ammonia in the well, which there's also some level of ammonia in a well, that'll consume chlorine. Then, from anywhere where water sits longer, there tends to, it creates conditions for biofilm growth. So wherever you have biofilm growth, you're going to have chlorine demand. And so that biofilm growth can occur in the well, actually on the surface of the aquifer. It can occur anywhere in a pipe, not only from the well, but in the well houses, in the distribution system that can go over, and the amount of biofilm isn't uniform across your system. So some areas may have more biofilm, which may cause more chlorine demand. And I think generally speaking, wherever there's lower flows of water, that creates conditions for more biofilm growth, and that can cause a higher chlorine demand. And it can also be a source of those taste and odor issues, the biofilm, because of the chemical reactions that are happening. Not only is there the distribution system that you guys are concerned about, or that you have control over, but then there's the homeowner. And by the time a homeowner samples it, it goes through their private plumbing system, which can also have biofilm because of how their plumbing is, which, you know, the utility commission has no control over homeowner piping. But my point is, it's complex because there's potential in the well, there's potential, now you have media in all 3 of your wells that's being treated. There's big vessels, water can sit, can form biofilm growth. That can be a source of the issue. Anywhere within the distribution piping can be a source of the issue, and then in people's homes can be a source of the issue. That all leads to that taste and odor that comes out and causes a complaint. So in a perfect system, if there was no biofilm and you added 0.2 there, yes, it would go all the way to the end, and it would be 0.2 at the end. But I don't think a perfect system exists like that, because there's always going to be some level of biofilm growth, and there's always going to, from a groundwater well, and it gets more complex with the surface water, if you're drawn from a river or a lake, some of those organics and ammonia are more present in the surface water than in groundwater. So there's, so I guess I'm just setting the stage as to why there's complexities here. I don't know if that answers your question or leads to more questions.
No, I know, like in a private well out in the country, you know, periodically you shock it with chlorine.
Mhm.
Shoot some chlorine pellets down, and I guess it's up to the owner, buyer beware, or whatever with his well. It's up to him to get it tested and whatever periodically, but now you explain about like the media and what can be created in that as well. I'm just wondering, are we fighting just the aging old, our distribution system? I mean, I don't know
And
how much
part
of, I don't know
to
how much of the
play-
study
to-
MSA got into this, you
To
know.
play into what he was just explaining, our wells were actually, so, I mean, you see so where we have 2 parts per million coming out the whole last year, we're actually dosing at a 6 to get 2 out of the well. So we're using up 4 parts per million in the well house itself between the conditions of the water coming out of the well, the conditions inside of the filter itself, different irons and everything else that it's reacting along the way before it actually leaves to go see the customers.
So you're dosing at 6 at that injection point, and then it goes, mixes, and by the time you take that sample, it's at a 2.
It's down to a 2 already before it ever leaves this building. So then from this building, it has to go into the water tower or everywhere along the way. And by the time the customer sees it, you know, you're down in the 0.5s to 1s to,
What's it read at the water tower?
depends on the time of year. It's not as high as you'd hope.
Because that's another complicating factor, temperature. The higher the temperature, the more chlorine demand. There's more biological activity, and there's a need for more chlorine in warmer water than in colder water.
That's part of that dip last summer.
I was just gonna ask.
That was because it was during summer, warm weather. And that's a disadvantage to the physical layout of our system is that the wells are in the middle of town, water tower's at the far end of town. Well, all that water has to see all that piping before it ever sees the tower. So if I put it out at a 2, it's down to a 0.8 before it gets there to go into the tower. Then it sits in the tower for 2-3 days. It's down to, 0.6 by the time it's coming out of the tower to go to somebody's house. So, I mean, if I had it the way I'd want it, I'd build the 1,000-gallon per minute well right at the foot of the water tower, and then you're not losing it along the way. But that's just not really feasible. Because at least the water you're putting in goes straight into the tower.
So then maybe you can explain why maybe you can't, why we're losing all this chlorine that you're seeing, but the odor is there. Why?
Great question, because Alex has done a great job of tracking the chlorine data, and then none of these lines reciprocate, and taste and odor isn't necessarily proportional to any of these lines. So there is some things that we know about this that can answer or give some insight. I think taste and odor complaints are often caused by unwanted biofilm growth in the wells or the water system, especially the stagnant areas like I talked about. And if biofilm becomes excessively thick, it can cause a rotten egg odor, or it can cause a musty odor. So there's different odors that can be perceived, and maybe it all kind of gets lumped in when people are describing a bad odor. But if there's like a sulfate reducing type of biofilm, that can also lead to some of these odors, but it can also lead to corrosion in your system, which may have been one of the contributing factors of the lead level exceedance in the past few years. So I guess if we know that there's biofilm, I think the number one, I guess there's always going to be some level of biofilm, but to control it, we do these maintenance practices like unidirectional flushing. And so that was when I got involved, and I last sat in this room, I think we talked about we could do some larger projects to try to address the media or replace some of the treatment parts, but let's start with a basic maintenance practice. Yeah, there's cost, there's time to it, but in the scale of versus a whole project, this is a pretty low-hanging fruit effort to try. So tried to clean out the distribution system, and I guess my intention, it was never a one-time one and done. It's a best practice for a utility, and the idea is that the more you do it, the more you're scouring those edges of the pipes where that biofilm can grow, and hopefully you clean it out and you get to a better place in the whole system as a whole. And regular flushing plays into that, but the unidirectional flushing is really meant to scour the edges of the pipe and to hit at a higher velocity so you can remove some of that biofilm. Now interesting, if you remove one layer of biofilm, sometimes there's a softer layer of biofilm underneath it, which can also cause chlorine demand, which I think there's summer that's contributing to this dip, but there may also be, you peeled one layer of the onion off and you're still getting through a little bit more of the biofilm, which can cause a temporary chlorine demand in there. But I guess with the biofilm, I think that's one of the contributors of the taste and odor. I guess the other thing is whenever you add chlorine, you can have disinfection byproducts, and those can also give off odors too. So I think, between sulfate reducing or sulfur reducing bacterias, as well as the combination of the chlorine, I think those can all contribute to taste and odor. And once again, it's a complex system. Water's always moving, and it depends seasonally. So that's why you might not see a pattern of the taste and odor issues. So I don't know if did that help with your answer, or did?
Kind of. Sure, thank you.
I mean, what is it? I heard you say, like, what is it caused from? Or what is the taste and odor caused from?
Yeah.
And I think there's the chemistry. I think the sulfur reducing bacterias this biofilm is one of the leading reasons why there's taste and odor issues in water distribution
So
systems.
we do the directional flushing. How often do we do that
Right now, so far once a year.
now? Is that adequate? Or should it be done
I
more
think
often?
given what we've learned in the last year, I would say you should do it twice a year until you perhaps see some more results.
And what time of the year?
Once in the spring and once in the fall. My hope is that you could do it maybe in the spring here, and then the fall, and then maybe the spring and the fall, and by the next fall, hopefully, you're gonna see some results where you can back it down to like once a year. I mean, there's regular flushing that the system would have to do, good practice, but I guess this is there's more effort, more wasted water, I understand, but I think like, it seems like there was, I mean, from the time unidirectional flushing was done in May, my understanding, there really wasn't any complaints until like 9 months, no, 8 months later was the first time that you had complaints.
Yeah, I mean,
They're ongoing.
that's when they get on Facebook and the fire gets started.
Okay.
But I think to answer your question, there was no chlorine in the system to react to the biomatter before, and now that there's enough in there, it's reacting, and now the
That's what I
customer's
said.
tasting it, now it's smelling it.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me that, and I'm not a scientist, but it's interesting to me that we have lower levels of chlorine seen throughout the city, and yet the odor is still there. Or the taste, some people can taste it too, I guess. At the tap in their homes, so. There's less chlorine, but there's more smell.
Well, you're saying in the last few months, or?
Well, in the last few months is when I've been really noticing it, but I'm on the end of the line, so I'm not a good sample.
Well,
I
they're still a
guess.
customer, but, yeah.
Just saying, it's just interesting to me that when I see the orange line go down, I'm still, I don't remember last summer.
Right.
But like in the fall time, it went back up a little bit, and yeah, I can smell it now, so.
And when the DNR tells us we're not getting enough of that out to the end of our system, is there a penalty or?
The only, so reel it back to the only DNR required amount is to be a measurable concentration at the end of your system. So some people play the game of 0.01 is measured, so you're in compliance, but
And when you're not in compliance?
it's a problem. So.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating though, like, let's say January, February, putting in almost 1.5, and we're only at 6.65, and you go back to, seems like you're still having to add more to stay above that line than what we would have previously. I don't know what exactly saying.
I guess another line would be helpful, what you're actually putting in at the well house might have been helpful here, potentially.
Well, I mean, the blue line is what's coming out of the well.
That's coming out, but
What we're physically dosing to
yeah,
get there.
physically dosing.
It's a lot of data points.
Is that something that constantly, that constantly is changing, or?
No, not really.
So that's more of a straight line above this?
No, that's, this blue line of the water coming out of the well is generally correlated to
Okay,
how you adjusted,
okay.
what you put into it.
But I think it's telling that if you dose 6 and you're getting about 2, so most of that chlorine demand happens right
Before it leaves.
initially, and it's coming from the wells and maybe as it's working through the filter media. Those would be the only 2 real sources. And then, so if you're losing 4 there, and if you look at the difference between the graph here, it's about 1 to 1.5. So you're losing, of that 6, you first lose 4 almost instantly, then you lose another 1 to 1.5. Just moving through your distribution system. So I think the greater chlorine demand, and maybe where the target area, the next target area would be, was to focus on that source. Knowing that it's the source, it's the filters, it's the distribution system, and then it's even people's homes that all contribute to chlorine demand as well as taste and odor.
When '83 the water tower was constructed, wouldn't there have been some logic? I know it's elevation, that's why they put it where they did, but wouldn't there have been some logic between having it positioned by a well? I mean, the second spot we had reserved is within reasonable sight of our newest well. I'm just wondering what the logic was, or wasn't there even this kind of consideration back then about circulation of chlorine throughout your entire water system or whatever? I mean, why would we have built a water tower so far from our wells if this was gonna create this kind of problem, I guess is what I'm saying.
So I was not engineering in 1983, but I can offer this. I've done water tower sightings, and things that we consider are capital costs, which are influenced by the elevation. So if you're at a higher spot, less cost to build the tower. Potential for development. If you're at the edge of a system, sometimes if you think, well, there could be more development or large water users, you'd want to be close to a water tower. And then, I guess, I don't know if I'm pretty confident we didn't have the same understanding of biofilm and water quality back in the early 80s as we do now, but I think generally the concept of you need turnover in your water tower, because in the winter it creates icebergs, water tank freezes without much turnover, and in the summer there is water quality issues. I think that's been known for a long time, is that in the summer, if your water's not turning over, you're going to have taste and odor issues because of that water reservoir bacteria growth. And I think those are some of the main things when siting a water tower, and then proximity to large diameter water main. Like, you gotta move that water out so you can have fire protection. If you have a big tank and an 8-inch pipe, you can't move that water out, so those would all be reasons why you'd site a water tower somewhere in a city.
I think elevation's the only thing we did right. What I'm hearing.
On the biggest hill, and said, let's put it here.
It's usually the logical spot, like,
Well, and then of course Clearview was the Clearview facilities were a major water user up there. But as far as development, Ross, like, you have to see that we had any potential development at the north end of that town for housing or industrial or anything. And we built the mains to accommodate, you know, the exiting of the water from the water tower there. I don't know. Just trying to pick at straws here to try to come up with something, but it is the #1 complaint around town right now, and, you know, they're cruel.
I mean, would we be harming anything if we would like make this our threshold amount that you're putting in?
There's no way to bypass the
We want
median.
this, the orange line to be at that number, is what we're after, so we're kind of, I was kind of in that range, but. Yeah, and that's one thing that basically, we already started the idea of, it can't get any worse, so let's just turn it down and let it ride for a little while. And then we've already started that over the last 2-3 weeks, but,
So how often do you sample? Once a month?
we sample at the wells once a week, and we sample in the distribution system twice a week. So right now we're working it down, and our actual goal right now was to have the wells to starting at a 1, because we obviously didn't spend a ton of time there. And then to try to either flush or whatever we could do if we had to get that distribution system line where we wanted it. So that was kind of my current strategy for this, coming into the summer, just to spend more time at that level and see what happens. But basically, the reason I put when Brad came the first time was that that's basically where we were for a quarter. And I don't know that it was great at that point, but.
Is there any way to bypass the median wells?
You want orange toilets.
And that's, you know, I've been in communities where that's the situation there.
And it's.
Putting in iron removal filters and what have you, along with their softeners and stuff like that, so, you know, I just thinking out loud, you know, if that was a point of contamination or whatever. I mean, we talked about that initially, about updating the media and the wells and whatever, and thinking that might be the biggest culprit.
There's another way around that, in that you can sequester your iron. So what that does is you add a different chemical that bonds to the iron that keeps it from staining toilets. So in theory, if you want to, instead of fixing the problem, go a different route, we could add phosphates, which sequester the iron, so that we just stop using our iron filters and add a different chemical. And if that was the problem and you wanted the cheap way out, that would be a solution. But
We haven't changed media in our filters
that's-
for decades, so I mean, that's.
right.
I'm trying to come up with something here, you know,
Well,
that, hey,
what's
this is the issue here at the head end, let's get around it for right now, take some tests and find out, you know, where we're at. I mean, I'd rather drink chlorine than rust, you know, like, yeah, I still drink our water to this
Well,
day, I don't have an
and-
issue with it, but.
Rust, and correct me if I'm wrong, but iron in your water will give it that blood taste. That.
Iron.
The iron taste, you know.
Yeah.
Penny taste.
You know.
Yeah. You know, like
So
chewing
it's
your
just
water.
a different taste, it's.
So, have we done anything to like test our well quality? Is there metals in that well that are causing?
I think that's a great idea.
It's a great segue.
Yeah. And I guess, to me, my recommendation is there should be more testing done at your wells and your filters. We've talked about the filters. We know they haven't been replaced. We don't really know. We think they could be contributing, but we don't really know. About a month ago, MSA was on site with Alex, and we just did a visual test. Just took samples in white buckets every minute. We filled up a white bucket and just watched what happened over a 10-minute horizon, and we looked at what the
Of the raw water from the wells.
raw water from each of the 3 wells, and then we looked at it initially, took a picture after it sat for 10 minutes, and then took another picture after we dosed each bucket with chlorine, because we wanted to see just a visual and an aromatic or a smelling test. And what that showed is that the water was, definitely dirtier in that first bucket or 2, in that first minute or 2. And to me, that indicates that there is a biofilm issue. There is something in the water that's causing corrosion on that steel casing and discoloring the water. So I think that was a first really low cost test to look at what's going on. But I think there's more opportunity to test it further and to look into the specifics of the biofilm. And I guess I would recommend testing at 3 different locations, 2 pre-filter and 1 post-filter. Like when you kick on the pump, 1 test initially, right in that first minute, that would give us an idea of what the water is when it's in that stagnant condition, because the pump shuts off and then it sits, and then water sits in the well for maybe, 6 hours, 12 hours, about a day. And so as water sits, that's creating an environment for bacterial growth. And so we test that first minute. We test after the well's been pumping 60 minutes, so that should give you an indication of what's coming out of the aquifer, the deep sandstone. And then also after 60 minutes, we test not only before the filter but after the filter. And between those 3 testing samples, we get a really good idea of what's happening at that source. Now the interesting thing, the EPA, the city of Juneau has to test over 200 parameters, iron, manganese, radionuclides, VOCs, SOCs, but they don't really have you test for some of the key components that really give us insight into taste and odor issues. One of those is ammonia. I think you've done some ammonia sampling, so we have some data there, but there's also, I guess, some biofilm testing that can be done that would give us some good insight as to how much biofilm is there and how is it contributing to corrosion, and maybe give us a better idea of what we could do at the source. And that would even answer, is the media really a problem, or is it just a perceived problem? I think we could get some idea as to what's going on there.
Was there any correlation with like your visual and odor test that you did between the 3 wells, of which of those 3 wells, which one runs the most?
They all run the same.
They run the same.
Yeah.
One was
One was a little dirtier than.
but they all kind of had that same trend. First minute or 2, dirtier buckets, and they cleared up over time.
Like there's no way to circulate water more often without lowering your tower, which then you would lower your pressure, which you would be allowed, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could, in theory, you could maybe run the first 5 minutes of water to waste or something, but you'd have to automate and put something in to do that. But I guess ultimately, the question of the investigation work is what would it prompt us to do if the results were good or bad?
good question. So, so with the proposed investigation, you know, what are the likely solutions? I think, so we started with cleaning the distribution system, or just trying to, not that it was a perfect clean, but, you know, that was one maintenance best practice. Another one is chemical rehabilitation of wells. There's shock chlorination, which it's effective, but I think we've learned ways to be more strategic and to be more effective in terms of cleaning of the aquifer and breaking down. There's crusty things that grow in a well, and there's also soft things that grow in a well. So depending upon how much hard, scaly things are there versus the soft, more gelatinous kind of things, that can come up with a recipe for chemical rehabilitation. And so you come up with this recipe to try to clean out the well. So I think this testing would give us a very specific recipe as to what we could do. But most likely there would be some level of chemical rehabilitation that we would recommend out of this. And then maybe there would be some recommendation of what to do with the filters, whether that's, you could also chemically clean the filters, or kind of the same concept of cleaning the well, but cleaning the filters, or it may mean replacing the media. But I think typically we're heading down a path of trying to optimize maintenance for the city, to try to reduce the biofilm, to try to get an understanding of where the biological growth is happening, because I think where the biological growth is happening, that's really most of the cause of the taste and odor issues.
So these tests, would they have to be outsourced, or is it something we do in our lab?
They would be outsourced, yeah. So MSA would, we'd take on as the sub-consultant water quality investigations. They're kind of a niche firm. There's only one of them in the area, and I think Andy Jacques used to be a professor at Platteville. He started his own business, but he has a trademarked testing methods, but I mean, he's really the only person around that's looking at biofilm at this level of detail. I think MSA doesn't bring them in on any project, but I think the way that we understand the issues here in Juneau, I think this is an appropriate time to bring him in and take a closer look at the biofilm issues.
And so what he's gonna tell us is basically the blend of, if you just do chlorine, or there's acids you can use, or there's any number of chemicals that would be utilized during a chemical rehab project, right?
Yeah, this investigation would help to be able to come to those conclusions.
What did we do to this well 8 years ago?
It was basically an airburst, but it wasn't technically airburst, but it was pulsing air into the aquifer to break loose any fines that might have gotten caught within the.
Isn't that a radon thing, or well added?
The idea of it was because as a well draws in water, it pulls the fines into your developed gravel aquifer, so it'll plug certain areas that it's preferring to pull water from, so then it'll pull water from a different band. Well, the band of water that it was pulling from, the theory was that band had more radium in it as opposed to where it was originally. So they wanted to reset the well back to pulling water from the better band of water. That was the purpose of that.
And so I just described, things grow inside a well, so like it could be some of that biological growth creates more of a hard scale, and that air burst is effective at breaking up some of that, or even biofilm growth that's even soft. Some of that air burst can work through that. The other approach, other than putting force into there, is chemical rehabilitation, where you're putting in chemicals in high concentration doses and cleaning it out. So there's different ways to approach it. Not saying that there's no criticisms of air burst. I think it definitely has its place and does think sometimes it's used in combination too. It's the air burst plus the chemical. So you first break up the really hard stuff, and then you get all the rest of the cleaning done through the chemical rehabilitation.
And one presentation I saw through the conference the other week was to do it in unison, so that, because if your developed gravel area in the well is plugged with fines, if you add chemical, it's still just gonna go into the area that the water is drawing through.
Yeah.
So you wanna loosen everything up so that when you add the chemical, it goes into the bands that were plugged in the first place. So it's wise to do both at the same time. But
So what are next steps? You gonna keep ramping down and then you guys come up with an estimate and budget for it, or what?
So ultimately, what I have in the back of my head is that well one is due to get pulled it's due to get pulled this year anyway, but I didn't budget for it, so it's too late for that. It's due to get pulled anyway, so I would think it would be wise to incorporate some sort of rehab, whether that's with air or chemical or however within that project, based off of the results that we may come up with, and that would be a wise first step. I guess that just another thing to keep in the back of our heads is that none of these filters have been maintained in ever. And everyone in the field that I have brought in to look at the filter housing at well one says, what is that?
It's got lava rock in it.
And in
It's
some,
not used.
it's redwood in it, there's lava rock in it. What I'm afraid of is that if you think we're gonna call somebody in to replace the media in this tank, as soon as you open that can of worms, there's no reasonable way to budget for it. It's gonna be, we have this open, it's out, we have to fix it now. Well, if you budget 80 grand to do media, and then suddenly this hole inside of this tank is shot, now what do we do? It's just one thing I'm a little afraid of, so there's gotta be a point where it's more reasonable to just take this tank that was made in 1941 and replace it.
Sounds like
Might be a
probably
more-
the smart thing to
And
do
if
at
you don't
this point.
replace your media in kind, DNR will require pilot testing before you switch the media style. So there's an effort there, and
So,
So your testing proposal, how much it cost?
Alex, what do I have in there?
17.9.
17.9. So this would be, this is the investigation that we're proposing. I mean,
Is this only well one, or is this all the wells?
it's all 3 wells. We'll be doing the similar test like I described, the 2 before the filter, 1 after the filter. It's an in-depth look. It's a lot of money for testing and an investigation. But I-
So with, I don't mean to cut you off, with this investigation, they're gonna be able to tell us how to treat it? Or why wouldn't we just
Or if
treat it?
If it needs treatment.
Yeah, I guess that too.
Just
Well,
not to ignore the question, but is there, if you talked to a well driller, is there a general 90% of the time we use this recipe? So do we just skip the investigation, just do it kind of thing?
That's what I'm saying, you saved 18,000, fixed the problem.
And just try it to address the problem first? I guess that's the ultimate question, and I don't know the realm of cost.
I would think there's each well pump contractor will have a different solution. They'll have a solution that they're familiar with. They'll propose, it may or may not be appropriate for your water chemistry, but I'm sure they would be happy to provide you with a solution. And if you ask for chemical rehab, just about everyone will give you a
They'll
chemical,
say,
sure, we can do
Sure,
that.
we can do that.
And it might range from shock chlorination to something more complex, but they'll give you a solution, yes.
But I guess then the question is, was it the most effective means?
won't know until you know.
And the hope is that we set you up with a greater understanding. We're gonna put some goggles on and look closely at this. So yeah, it's an investigation, but the hope is that this gives you the ability to make progress and have a plan to move forward so that you can make some progress on these taste and odor issues.
I guess another just general question I would have for the room is, you know, would we rather, you know, I don't think anybody can disagree, we gotta spend some money in our well houses. Would we rather do one at a time and just see if this is helping, or just try to take one loan, do it all at once, kind of the way we did the wastewater plant, and just get it done with?
I think we looked at that, changing the media and rehabilitating those well houses. And we were looking at about 400,000 a well, I believe, at that time. So we were looking at 1.2 million. But that was 2 years ago. I mean, you're looking at quite a bit more. You're looking at 1.9.
Well, and that, okay, so I have the numbers that we came up with 2 years ago. It was 1.2 million 2 years ago to do the full scope projects. Just media replacements were 600,000. But neither of those included pulling wells and doing chemical rehabs. So you're adding even more onto that.
You're probably looking
That's per well.
No,
The well you're pulling now is the oldest well.
it's just the
I mean,
one
with
it's
rehab.
been the longest since we've touched it.
But I mean,
It's at,
It was the first
That's
one
the
we
oldest,
did.
but I mean,
Is
the
it?
equipment hooked up to it after is the oldest of all the three
I
wells.
don't know the age of the filter at well two.
Well, I didn't know that well was the first well they had in town, that was a long time ago.
What's that?
Oldest well.
One you want.
Number one.
Number one, I don't see.
That was at the base of the well or something.
Right.
That's the first well they built.
Oh, that media at well two was here when you and I worked in the early '70s here. And then late '60s is when they added well three, wasn't it? Late '60s.
So, I don't think anybody can argue that.
Well, if you only do one, how do you test the results?
Quantify if it actually
Yeah,
worked?
how do you actually test the results unless
that's
you
the
exclusively,
You'd be able
we
to
can't
tell
get by
the-
and running just one well,
and the
not these two
distribution.
smaller ones, we've gotta run at least two wells.
Well,
So,
Yeah.
You can get by and running, Alex and I have talked about this, you can get by and running well three by itself.
right,
So you could try well three first and just
Right.
run well three, but that's also, we just pulled well three like 2 years ago. As the newest filter we have.
But if you add chlorine by each well,
Yep.
so if you rehab it and you have to add less chlorine to get
Then you
the
know,
chlorine level you're at,
and you
then
know in theory that it worked.
that it
right.
worked.
But being on one side of town, is that gonna push it all the way to the other side of town?
It's gonna be
Ru-
messing.
Running on just one well? Are we gonna get, aren't we gonna get spotty readings? I mean, everything's looped.
Yeah, it'll still make
Tower,
it,
right.
yeah, it's ultimately going to the tower.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of it'll go a little further than it would have.
Right,
Like that East Street main would be a different main.
right.
But, yeah, so I think we're on the cusp of,
If you're doing something logically, that makes sense.
so that's the question here is kind of this, and ultimately if this, you're talking about pulling all three wells, rehabbing all three wells, and at that point, you gotta bring all the wells up to code, and then that's the other, this is gonna snowball.
Well, this well's always played competition with Sensi. So, you know, I remember back in the '70s, they dropped theirs and then put ours in harm's way, so we had to lower ours here at this location. So,
That's why we're-
does that have a bearing? I mean, what are the tests that Sensient come up with, or is there water?
What they use their water for is, they're not drinkable,
Drink it, so test it.
Yeah,
It's mainly, since it's mainly used for cooling.
is that right?
You know, there's some,
There's some
you know,
really
in
good
the
product.
process, but
You know,
A lot of it's cooling.
They got some potable water.
right.
Yeah, but that
We
doesn't
get
come
them.
off of their
That
well.
comes from us.
that comes from
Right.
drinking water there.
Yeah, I mean, the water's used several
So,
times.
That's why when, try to tell the customers that, you know, when we're talking about this, like, we're trying to do all the reasonable cost things first, but we're starting to get to the expensive options.
Well, nothing is cheap nowadays, so.
Well, and just to the merit of, I know that well one, that filter was built in 1941. So I'm just afraid that you're gonna open that hatch and say, yeah, we're gonna replace the media, and then find a disaster
Yeah,
inside.
well, that one you probably would just plan on having to replace you'd have to just plan on replacing the whole
Where-
works,
where's the
because
media?
whether you want to or not, because if
And-
you do what you said, I mean, it's one thing you can start and say, well, but then
then
you
you're
have to,
sitting
but
with
then
it.
you don't have a vessel sitting there to do right away, so it's like you're probably smart, I mean,
And-
that's 80 years old, so.
Wells 2 and 3, they at least have general filter vessels, which are well known in the industry. People have seen them, people have worked on them.
Yeah.
A little bit more confident in servicing those.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm
Well
just saying.
one specifically is not.
Yeah, well,
it's
one
not
is,
all.
is 80 years old, it probably, unfortunately, the whole thing should be replaced.
I mean, you've got testing now before and after it, and when you rehab it, you have new testing.
You would at least have data for before and of what's going in and what's coming out of well one. I mean, it might be just to do the whole shoot match on well one and
That's where I'm
and see where
personally
and then see where we're at.
try to run
after-
well one as much as we can and see if it helps.
Yeah. And see, I mean, we should even be able to see, you mean, you know what's going in and you know what's coming out of it. I mean, does that get closer together or not?
So that's kind of what I came into this meeting thinking, is that realistically, we know we gotta spend money there.
Yeah.
And
That
I'd
seems
like
to-
to start with that, and that, in and of itself, because we know if we replace a tank, there's pilot studies, everything, it's a process
Mhm.
that has to be engineered. Whereas, once you know if it works or not, like-kind media replacements don't need to be fully engineered, not to, you know, we could bring in a contractor to just physically do
Yeah, but I
those
mean,
service
if we,
works
but if we
after
bring
the
in a
fact.
new, we put in a new one that's similar to the.
I'm just saying for wells 2 and 3, if we do
Yeah.
well 1, the whole gamut of well 1, engineer the whole project,
Yeah, and only do the media if that's all we need.
well, whatever we have to do, just
Mhm.
have the whole project for well 1 done
Mhm.
and engineered.
Yep.
So we can come back later and do wells 2 and 3, now that we know the recipe, that hey, this either worked or
Yep.
didn't work.
Yep,
We could potentially get away with not doing an engineered project for
that,
those.
that makes sense to me.
So you wanna do the investigation?
If it gets us
I
started.
think it starts us in the right direction.
The only
I
other,
don't know, I think we should wait.
the only other option we have is we can, like I said, we can.
Keep directional.
We can turn the chlorine down for a few months and try it and flush the hell out of it.
Direction,
And we got
more
the
directional
directional
flushing.
coming up in
Right,
in
so
spring.
you can see if it, basically all you're doing then is confirming either, you know, it's in your distribution system or it's in your wells still, so.
Yeah, but when I look at your thing, I see a directional flushing and then I see the lines trending down. I'd like to see what happens again.
Well, and a lot of that was that trending down was, it's summer.
Summertime.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just
We-
saying,
we weren't-
instead of paying right now $18,000 for testing, and we don't know.
Maybe do directional
Could
this
only
spring
do
and the
directional
fall and
once.
see what
Yeah.
the fall after
Not
what
that
happens.
it's not a
in the-
good option, and I appreciate you.
I just wanna be here to, you guys have had issues, so I just wanna be here to offer some ideas and be here for questions.
I just wonder if it wouldn't be more prudent to do our directional flushing, see what happens. Get maybe some numbers together on this well replacement you guys are talking about.
Well,
Because if we're gonna be spending a bunch of money on
it's
that.
gonna be a, well, and is that,
Yeah.
is that reasonable to say, hey, we know we're interested in potentially doing a project at well one? Do you just lump that testing into that project at the same time?
I would think I would
You
still
want it ahead
recommend
of
doing the
time.
testing whenever you can get to it, if it makes sense to put it with the project, yeah.
Cause I guess the results could potentially say we either do or don't include chemical rehab of the well, so it's a swing of $60,000 to $100,000. Well, say it's a swing of $50,000 whether we do or don't do this chemical rehab on the well. It might be nice to know that ahead of time before you make the spec of a full-blown project.
A big swab to run down well
So they do pigging, yeah, so in terms of,
It's a joke, but it's real.
it's really, they have like something with poly bristles, and they'll do that as the first, called mechanical cleaning. They'll swab out your well and try to brush the things off, and then you can try to go to airburst as another mechanical means, and then there's the chemical means as well. So they have a whole arsenal of tools in the toolbox to clean out wells, but yeah, swabbing is one of them.
So what's your pleasure? Well, we can always put it on another agenda and think about it. You wanted another meeting this month. Nick would like one later on this month. Bring it up again. Do some thinking about it and come back. How's that?
Alright,
Make sense?
how soon are you gonna be doing the directional flushing?
May and June. How long does that take?
Isn't it supposed to be spring? Wasn't it spring in the fall?
That's spring.
April.
April is spring.
Well, we could start
Alright.
sooner, I guess.
All right. I wanna thank you for
Beat
your
us myself
information.
here.
No problem. Is there anything you want me to stay around for? Anything else on?
You've had good information, thank you.
You're welcome.
We didn't know.
Sometimes I wonder if they believe me sometimes, so that also helps.
Not all of us is.
All right.
I'm not just making it up.
Thanks, thanks,
Yep,
Fred.
have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
I shall continue.
Yeah, you got 5 minutes.
It's not Alex.
Yeah. March 10th, we started up the new lab dishwasher, so that was an exciting moment of our wastewater plant project. The foreman that we had through Staub for the general contractor has moved on to bigger projects, so now we have Dakota. So we're working through him now, which has been a treat. We completed the performance testing for the oxidation ditch. nitrogen parameters were outside of the general spec that they're hoping for. So that goes along with how we lost nitrification through winter, and we had those exceedances through winter. And it was just because we weren't running it the way it maybe should have been. But the numbers have now come back into within spec range, specified range, so we are happy with the results we've gotten from the oxidation ditch now that it's running the way it should be. And we've learned certain parameters and settings to avoid for next winter. We found that with the new raw pumps that we had installed, one of them still was not pumping as much as we had hoped for. And we wound up noticing that the discharge check valve was seized in the closed position. So that would make sense why it was only pumping 650 gallons a minute instead of 850. So our crew took it apart and broke it loose and ordered the parts that it needed, and got it up and running at the 860 gallons a minute that we were hoping for. So that was a nice win for our crew. While doing that, we just in working with operating the valves associated with those pumps, we did notice that the plug valves on the suction side of those pumps are very, very difficult to operate. They do have the ability to pull the plugs out and actually replace them. So we're seeking a proposal through STOB and through the project now to get that service work done. I shouldn't call it service, but to get that replacement done within the project as long as we have the money available to get these valves to operate the way they should. So that would be potentially within our last changeover that will be coming. March 17th, R.G. Schmidt started downtown on Oak Street, and they wound up finishing last Friday on April 4th for all the underground water and sewer work that they had to do down there. So underground's done. The road base is coming in now starting this week. March 18th, we had our 3-year inspection with the DNR of our well houses with Sophia, our DNR rep, and no major issues were found other than the usual non-conforming features that were always there. She said we were doing well, and said to keep going with the chlorine. She was encouraging. So March 19th, a semi ran over the fire hydrant in front of Glass Floss and broke it, not at the traffic flange, but 3 or 4 feet below that. So R.G. Schmidt, while they're in town, when they come back to do the water services on South Main Street, they'll replace that fire hydrant from Glass Floss.
And somebody, that
It-
driver's insurance. will
Correct. We
cover
did
it.
file a report with Dave Beal with the truck driver. It'll go through the insurance. I attended the Wisconsin Rural Water Association conference in the end of March. Spoke with a lot of vendors, watched a lot of presentations. Spoke with a lot of other operators just with their experiences with chlorine especially and other stuff. And I feel like I came out of it and learned a lot, and really enjoyed it. So that was a nice way to get out of the office. And April 1st, we replaced a broken curb stop on Midway Street that was hit by construction workers while they were building the house at the south end of Midway Street. So Lori will be billing that to the construction crew that broke it. That was our month.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Alex? If not, thank you. Lori?
What I mentioned before, we have the disconnect letters that went out. We're doing disconnects on April 16th, which is next Wednesday. And of course Pam is all excited. Just, it's here, I get to do disconnects. So, I mentioned about the handful of people that are over thousands of dollars because they just stopped paying their bill in October to November-ish and let it ride. There's been a change in energy assistance. They called Pam the other day and explained that for crisis payments, they used to pay against the whole bill, and now they're only gonna be covering electric. So there's gonna be a lot of people out there that are gonna be hurting still because their water sewer bills are not gonna be included in that energy assistance payment. The audit went really, really well this year. There was a lot less questions after the fact. They did come in this time for one day and then did the rest remote. We had a lot, but like I said, it was a lot less emails coming back and forth as to follow-ups and whatever. So that's going well. We got the scholarship little brochure in the bill this month, so when you get your bill, there should be the little insert letting everybody know that we have the scholarships available and how to apply. And we have people coming in to give us an estimate on this carpet, because I had the estimate on the office carpet, but then you guys had mentioned about this one needs to be replaced too, so we'll be coming in next week to get that, those figures, and I just purposely waited until later now because I said, thought it didn't make any sense to replace carpet in the middle of winter, so at least keep it newer a little bit longer. So that'll be getting done. I think that's about all I got.
Do we also work with Dodge one, so that their guidance counselor, whatever they call it now?
Yeah, they email me every spring and
Okay,
then,
so that they can
yeah.
let
Yeah, they've got.
their students know.
Yeah.
Okay, super.
Yeah, they've got in fact, they made an online, application, so they can just do it right online and submit it that way.
Good, thank you.
How are your phones working?
They came out and did something new. We got Javis came out and gave us new phones, and that didn't seem to make much difference. They are still going out once in a while, but it doesn't seem as bad. They did something else. Did they do something with the?
They replaced those black boxes, I believe. They were called.
Oh, in the well house.
Yeah.
They replaced all of our modem, whatever.
Spectrum do that, or Davis?
Spectrum did.
Spectrum.
Yeah, they came in and replaced the equipment, and they mentioned, because Javis was here at the same time, and they mentioned to Javis that I'm surprised this equipment even worked at all. It was that bad a shape. So, but Pam just had her phone go out again this morning for a couple minutes, but not been nearly as bad as it was.
Good.
All right. Anybody else have any questions for Lori? If not, thank you. Nick?
All right, so first on the agenda, if you guys remember, last meeting I discussed the load interconnection request form that was submitted to the ATC. And what that outlined was the significance that we were looking at what we could do to improve or secure our reliability on the transmission line. Just to give you guys a little bit of insight on that second page. This is how our transmission loop feeds our system in Juneau. And you can see with our downtown substation, which is in the middle, and our north substation, which is on the north side, is got a radial tap coming off of one single blue line coming off of that transmission loop to our substations. And what this exhibit's not showing is that by our industrial substation is there is no connection between the two blue dots on that line. The connection is through our substation. So whenever we take an outage on the west side transmission line, we end up losing our substation because they need to de-energize this whole portion from 245 LB, which is the top left low break switch, all the way down to switch 652A, which is by our downtown substation. So whenever they gotta do work on that section of transmission, we need to drop off our industrial sub. So the way around that is to have an added switch, which would be in our industrial substation, and we can isolate it up to the center point inside our substation. So it would be energized either from the east side of the industrial substation or the west side. And if they would do work on that transmission line, our industrial substation could stay online.
Why do you think it wasn't constructed like that first off?
I don't know.
I mean, that's like a no-brainer to me.
Absolutely. And I've been bringing this up since I've been taken over here, like, why can we not change this? Well, what happened was when Juneau built the industrial substation, the industrial sub was, and when we also owned the 69 kV line, when we owned the transmission line and was sold to ATC, the industrial substation was not built to ATC standards, so they did not purchase the transmission bus work in our sub to add those breakers or high side switches that is needed to accomplish this. And that's where we are now, where I'm reaching back out to them and saying, hey, I want you guys to purchase this and make this change so that we have a reliable transmission system and we're not putting too much pressure on our other two substations, especially when it happens in the summer. So that LERF was submitted to the ATC and they came up with their plans, which is in accompanying with Forrester's plans, which is what you'll see on page 3, or the third page, which is the internal look of the substation. And then if you guys go one more page, that's a zoomed in photo of what you're seeing there. So what you'll see is they're going to be adding a disconnect point within our substation. It would be through, so we could feed it either from the east or west side. It also shows that industrial substation was always designed for an additional transformer, and what that additional transformer was designed to do is for our future voltage conversion. So ATC's portion would not be that whole bus work that you see where the figure A going north would be. That would be all of our own internal Juneau Utilities improvements. So you see that in order for them to make this improvement, we would have to extend the fence to the west, and the rest of that transmission bus work, high side circuit switches, the correct spacing to ATC standards, reconnecting into our existing industrial substation, etc. And then the next page just shows a different visual of what that would look like.
So they would purchase this from us?
So none of this is approved. They approved that they would agree to doing the necessary work. With this, Juneau Utilities would have to pay the full cost up front. And then you would develop what are common facilities or common costs, what's ATC's owned property, what's Juneau owned property, and there would be a percentage split. So of that $579,000, a certain percentage, which is you're still trying to figure out, would be Juneau's owned percentage and ATC's own percentage. What that split is, I don't know. It could be a 60% Juneau Utilities or vice versa. That they're still establishing, which is what we would discuss further in the next meeting. The rest of the things that you're seeing listed on the front page are optional things if we want to move forward. We need to ask ourselves, where do we see Juneau in the future? We have a 4 kV system that has its limitations. Do we see Juneau growing? Do we want to be ready for any industrial customers that may come? Because we're really limited with who we can take in at this time with a 4 kV system. The reason they have put optional on the second point is if we decide to go forward with this, do we have them put the foundations, the conduits, the ground grid, the oil containment in for that future 12.49 kV transformer while they're here to keep costs lower because they're going to inflate over time. And there's going to be another cost for a contractor to come in instead of a mobilization fee. Do we even do the minimum build and increase or secure our reliability for the transmission? Like I said, we're not locked into any of this at any point. We don't have to even do the minimum build if we don't want to.
Well, it seems to me like they kinda did us wrong by, they got what they wanted. They wanted the transmission line. I mean, they did pay for the upgrades, just to bring everybody up to speed. They rebuilt all along the rec trail, all the way from the north sub all the way down to the rec trail, and took care of all of that. We orchestrated, they reimbursed our cost 100%. But by doing what they did, by not putting that switch gear in there, just has disabled us to be able to be a good, have decent switch gear to be able to provide service to our community by doing it that way. Otherwise, we own that line, you know, we could do with what we wanted to and what have you. So, God, I think that should have some clout in bargaining with them that, hey, you know, you got what you wanted and kind of left us in a lurch here by not putting the adequate switch gear.
Well, and I think it's all gonna go back on to why didn't we do anything about this when that substation was built and when we negotiated those terms selling it? You know, they're gonna come back and say,
But initially, we only had the east feed into that substation.
right,
But
but
they
they
didn't have a west feed coming in.
and we owned that transmission bus work and high side switches in the sub, so they couldn't do anything with that. So instead of having, you know, simply put, all they would have had to have done is add a switch pole dead center of our industrial substation along the road there.
With a
That would
double
accommodate
switch.
us. We don't need to dig into this now. Like I said, I think this is gonna be a long conversation, and especially with the long conversation we had today. But for the last 2 weeks, I've been thinking about this nonstop, like what's right for our customers. Because simply put, right now, we have a really solid system, distribution system, we have a really solid system. Do we, like, where do we see ourselves in 10 years? Where do we see ourselves in 15 years? We're in a rate case right now. This would be the time to absorb those costs, because with this kind of a project, you would have to file a CA with the PSC construction agreement, which then you would be able to recoup through your rates. Is it the right time? Is it the wrong time? I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Juneau. I don't know how long our 4 kV system will last. I can tell you our substation's peak demands, we're sitting okay when we're running at normal operation with 3 substations. We have a 5 megawatt power transformer at the downtown here. That peak was seen in 2022 of 3.3. Juneau North, our north substation, has a 7.5 megawatt power transformer. We saw a peak of 4.5 this past year. Industrial substation has a 7.5 megawatt, and we saw a peak of 3.8. That was in 2020. So as far as demand goes and what our substations are capable of, we're not doing too bad. We're doing fairly well. When we never had a long duration where we had a substation down outside of when that north substation was under construction, which would have been like 8 years ago, which that would have been outside of my 5-year analysis that I took here.
That's 8 years ago already?
That goes a 3rd-year apprentice, which I think was when. So, and I could look back at that. That would be the only hold your breath moment is if we ever had a run off of 2 substations in the summer. That's when I would get nervous about potentially. The good things that I see is out of our 2 substations, our north substation and our industrial substation, is their dual voltage power transformers, meaning we can convert those to 1249 kV subs. The problem with it is you're going to have a long duration outage when we decide to, we're doing the conversion with that sub. We would take circuit outages at one sub. Say we're going to start at the industrial substation, we would kill the industrial sub, and I would hire Waupun Utilities, Columbus Utilities, whatever, and we would walk the circuits out and switch the bayonet fuses, get to your next normal open spot, and turn the substation back on and keep working your way out. You're probably looking at some customers would probably be looking at a day outage, or a full day outage. Or do you do this project that is being showed here, put a new 12 kV substation and add a circuit at a time, and no one would see an outage, or very short outages. There's a lot of things to think about, and like I said, this isn't the time to really hash this one topic out. I think we should wait until, one, I get the additional information of what common costs are gonna be, us versus ATC, and that would be reimbursed over 30 years. We'd get a monthly, it would kind of be like our attachment fees that we get from Charter and AT&T. We would get paid monthly from ATC. That would be recovered over 30 years. So there's a lot of things we gotta ask ourselves is, where do we see Juneau in the future? Do we wanna be limited short term, where we can't take any big industrial customer on? Do we want to, proceed forward and increase our reliability for a transmission, which is to do that minimum $579,000? And is this something that we feel is the right time to put on our rate payers right now, you guys? My business mind is to say we should secure our transmission reliability, but my gut's saying we're doing okay. Like, why? It's a lot of money to put on our rate payers. So this, just take home, think about it, think about questions, and let's follow it up at a different meeting. We can't set the meeting now because I don't have all the information from Frank yet, from Forrester. He was on vacation last week. So as soon as I get more information, we can set up a different special meeting for this.
You go to the voltage conversion, you don't have all the individual transformers calculated in there.
What's that?
You go to the voltage upgrade,
Right, and that's something to think about too.
All,
Are
all
we
the
getting that?
transformers gotta be changed.
And that was one thing I was gonna bring up in the next meeting is, you know, we've been buying dual voltage transformers for the last 10 years. What I haven't done a study yet of our system, what has to be replaced yet, and to figure out what those dollars are. And that's something I've discussed with Forrester, you know. My gut's been, and I've been relaying this to him, my gut is saying I'd rather have set up a 5 to 10 year schedule of transfer replacements. Or he suggested doing your transformers, filing a CA so you can recover those through your rate case by doing a one lump sum, because we're probably talking $1.5 million, you know, of transformers, especially when you start thinking of the three-phase transformers. That adds up quickly at, you know, it's average 40,000 a piece on three-phase. Obviously that increases with the size, but I don't know, it snowballed quickly. That's one of, it's not to you, Bart, but yep, it came in with the intention of let's increase our reliability of the transmission. And then they showed me what the initial cost is and how we would have to pay for it up front, and we could cover those costs over 30 years. That I don't understand how that is how it is, but it is. So let's talk about it more, but I wanted to at least get some information out to you guys now and start thinking about this.
How is the big transformers, the 12 KVs, more, you can get those quicker? I mean, the other transformers, you were talking year and a half out.
Yeah, so.
If this business was serious, wanting in Juneau, and it's like, we need to jump this up now.
Well,
Well,
it would be a long process if we weren't to do option A and B, or I didn't have them as option A and B, we're talking a 2 year. Like if a big customer wants to come in and it's like, you're talking 2 years to make it happen, and they're not gonna, they're gonna take it to go somewhere else. 4 kV is a dying voltage. It's gonna be to the waste eventually. But we have a really good system right now. We have 3 substations. We have dependability with, as far as being able to operate on 2 substations, and I use that loosely because we never had to do it in the dead of summer yet. But according to numbers, we could do it. I just wouldn't want to stretch it out very long. So,
I guess you really gotta look at what's the potential for Juneau growing to the size of the.
well, and there's always the big fear of mine is Sensient gets up and leaves. That would be
They give up, that's
detrimental
good.
to us as far as our ratepayers go and the cost of infrastructure we have in place, especially if we move forward with this. We lose one customer,
Yeah.
that puts us in a very bad spot. But I did have a meeting with Sensient, and they do have a 5-year schedule of expanding. What that expansion is, he didn't go into details, but they sound like they want to expand eastward. So there is potential for growth with Sensient, not the other way as well.
Believe it or not, the Juneau facility makes a lot of money for that company.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean, compared to other places they've got, Juneau was the backbone.
And Sensient, I had a really good conversation with them a couple weeks ago, and they are also investing in dual voltage transformers. Because I told them, I said, eventually, Juneau will be doing a voltage conversion. We don't know what that time frame looks like, and they said, well, we own these transformers. Is it smart for us to do it? And I said, yeah, it is, because those costs are just gonna keep increasing over the years, and when Juneau finally does do that, we will be requiring you guys to change your transformers. It'd be better to slowly work towards that.
What's the percentage you have in the field right now with dual voltage?
If I was a guess, I would say 50%. But we're still talking 2 point
Yeah.
something. But we'll talk about that more.
You think there's some bargaining with the ATC here?
No. Not at all. Since how it worked its way out when they first purchased it and how we decided to design the industrial substation, like we made those decisions.
Well, that had to be all on Forrester then.
Right. But how do you,
Because like I
how do
said,
you,
there was nobody in-house that had the expertise to point that all up, you know.
well, how do you go back 20 years and say,
Yeah. Just aggravating.
so. Alright, going on to, monthly updates. So we replaced the tennis and basketball court lights to LED. Joe purchased those in last year's budget. DPW got a lift from Lander, since when we redesigned that tennis and basketball court, we didn't put a big enough gate in to get any equipment in there, so we got a rental lift to get in there. So those are all changed out. I changed out the, timer dial for it right away. I have one of those ancient dial timers. What's that?
Watch it.
Yeah, ancient, man put that in, no. An Intermatic went in it to, replaced it, so, Intermatic with Intermatic. So those are up and running, they look good, I went in, a couple nights ago to see how it, spread out throughout the court, and we have really good coverage with the new LEDs. East Oak and Miller Street lights, Alex told you guys RG Smith wrapped up, they're gonna be coming in to start doing the road base. We did take down all the existing poles on East Oak as well as Miller Street. We'll be setting the footings for the two on Miller Street because that's outside of the road scope, so we're gonna be taking care of those two streetlights right away and getting those sidewalks poured ourselves. Those should be going up, they'll be poured Friday, and then at least two of the lights will be up. Probably gonna wait a week and a half to let the concrete, especially with the cold nights right now, so before we place the new lights up on them. And then as they take the road base out, we'll be putting in our new petrol pipe along East Oak and coordinating with the concrete company for when we're gonna set our sonotubes and pour those as well. The ATC job on the north side of town, JNR has started their work. They have poured in a small stretch down by our north substation. We set the junction today for it. And they have drilled across 2.5 of the 3 fields going from 26 to Fairfield. They're going across Angles. Kevin Boyd has winter wheat out there, so we're watching that like a hawk so I can avoid any conflict with that. So they should be wrapped up with that field portion, which was the big portion I wanted to get done before planting season took place here. ATC did pay that initial bill that we gave them for $248,000, which was for materials for the job. Switchgear update. For my last meeting, switchgears were bumped back to September. I did cancel that order, and before I canceled it, I got confirmation from S&C. They were able to fill my full order in May, so we'll be getting switchgears here in a couple weeks, which will allow me to continue with this ATC job as well as the Fair Street job that is currently incomplete because we've been waiting for those.
So you went with a different vendor then?
Yeah, so we went with Federal Pacific switchgears, which would have been our first Federals that we would have purchased. And the reason we purchased them was because they had a better lead time supposedly. And through the grapevine, I heard that Federal Pacific is most likely selling, so they're filling all their slots to make it seem like they have a lot of builds in place for whoever purchases it. And S&C is a company that we've used. That's what we have on our system right now. They're about $2,000 more a piece, which 5 units is $10,000, but ATC's paying for it, so. And it doesn't delay my project here, so we switched to S&C on those.
my world, nobody wants Middle Pacific.
Yeah. Well, they got a new, they have a new, they just brought them around. They had a bunch of rusting out issues with a lot of their equipment on our electrical distribution stuff. And yet supposedly it fixed that,
The old
which.
stuff, the old stuff that you could weld with the breaker, cause
Yeah,
you wouldn't
right.
try.
So, Nick and Dylan assisted, the wastewater treatment plant guys with the sewer, lifted up the motor or something. Nick and Dylan attended school, actually Nick's gonna be attending school next week, Dylan just finished up, last week. Dylan gave me a report that he got a 98.9 on his last test, so he's doing good with the school. There's a street light fault on Jewel Street. Nick and Dylan found it by the handhole right on Western, and that was repaired right away. We had to repair the back trailer, the suction valve, just from debris going by all the time, wasn't closing all the way. So we ended up replacing that out. Those valves are not cheap, like $600 a piece. So we replaced the one valve, so $600 repair on that trailer. I attended the MUW Foreman's Roundtable where we discussed any ongoing issues we're having, employee retention, talked about surplus demands, exchange information so that we can help each other out in these switchgear issues that we have where we can't get one and borrow one from another neighboring utility, and when ours does arrive, we can just give it to them. It was really good open table discussion, and a lot of good came out of that meeting. We took a glass floss outage. That was for hooking up their fire protection service. When we took that outage, we also changed the fusing in the fuse cabinet that's outside of glass floss, and that's because the initial fuses that were put in that fuse cabinet were not set up for the full service capability. It was set up for what that service was currently being utilized at, and they are increasing both services with their load because they're adding some air handling units. So I changed those fuses out to coordinate with their appropriate service sizes. I'll be attending the MUW Board of Directors meeting tomorrow. I'm the director for District 7. We're going to be discussing MUW's vision, what our utilities are utilizing most and what they can improve on. Part of the biggest things that MUW provides is our safety training with the updated regulations that happen, as well as the legislative side of things where have been happening quite frequently with our generation and any ongoing legislative issues. So that'll be tomorrow. That's going to be over by Sun Prairie. So that's all I got.
Anybody have any questions for Nick?
Looked like the old bases for the streetlights are consistent up and down the street there as far as
What's that?
they poured them that they weren't gonna go over.
Oh gosh.
Concrete was cheap.
I'm glad we had a bloater the size that DPW has. 'Cause
Remember when we had one superintendent, Ross, that thought that those lights just were gonna tip over one time or another.
Well, I'll tell you what, those lights were built different though back then, because those suckers are heavy. Those decorative concrete. I mean, they probably weigh. They're 1,000 pounds. You know, they weigh over probably 1,000 pounds.
And that core looked just as perfect in there going up the pole too.
Yeah. Well, there's probably inch rebar going all the way up to the top of those things. So,
I noticed you weren't cutting through them like butter or anything
no,
like that.
no. We only went through 2 roads, so we did good.
All right. President, I have nothing. Mr. Mayor?
I just wanna emphasize, yeah, the water situation is something that we've gotta get a handle on, and as soon as we can start making some improvements, I think we have to. And I know you're sick of hearing it, but I'm even more sick of hearing it. Like I said, I guess I have a higher tolerance and that kind of thing. I do try to coach some of those people. That's one thing about that chlorine, it doesn't take much. If you wanna put a whole house filter, it doesn't, chlorine filters pretty easy, you know, it doesn't take that much to get it out. But of course, then I get fired back, and we pay enough for water and sewer in this town, you know, we shouldn't have to do that kind of stuff. But you just try to help some of these people, you know, I mean, I hear stories about the smell in the shower and this and that, you know, you go through a shower head and all. It gets to the point, like I said, it sounds like you wanna turn a blind ear to it, but, you know, they've got every right to complain, I guess, and whatever, and we as public servants have to try to address it the best we can, so, like I said, keep it on your front burner, whatever you can do, and I think this commission's gotta look at spending more money to, I don't know what we got for the first 20,000, quite frankly, I don't know if all of that was worth what we got, or whatever. I thought maybe they'd give us a little more help on what they're looking for another 17,000. Yes, but engineering is not cheap. It's something that we're forced to, we don't have in-house expertise of that caliber, so I guess we're forced to reach out and I don't know if there's any competitive bidding on something like that for those type of services or not, you know.
No, but he's saying that's the one guy in the state that can do that.
Yeah.
Does that.
He's the guru, I guess, you know, we gotta bite the bullet and get have him share some of his knowledge with us or whatever, because we can't keep going on like this, because it's just not going to fly with the public.
Alex, did you mention that 17.9, that included the outside contractor, the cap, that was his cost, or about that, or no?
Well, so that was not brought up, but what he mentioned passing separately was, of that 17.9, I think more than half of it was for the outside subcontracted cost. So MSA was not making
Right.
Well, that's good, good.
It was split between them.
Okay.
And then on Nick's end of things, we spoke a little bit about this too, you know, and I'm in the same boat as Nick is on this. You gotta, I do find myself thinking about it at night, in the middle of the night, you wake up and you trash that stuff around in your head, but timing couldn't be worse. And I think Nick understands that too, as far as our utility structure is getting to the point where our rate structure, we gotta start watching, you know, and I like to be proactive, rather than reactive, but I guess I agree, trying to improve that transmission situation there, maybe put the voltage conversion on hold. I think it's probably, everything I hear from the meetings I go to and the people I talk to, Dodge County is an aging county. Population growth is not expected to spike or anything like that, so we've got limited space in our industrial park, though I always held an ear to Mr. Grattan's request that I have to continue trying to negotiate with the Nails Brothers to get a little bit more land on that side of town, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, but yeah, right now, I don't think there's an industrial user that would even look at us, or a huge industrial user or energy user that he would look at us with the amount of space that we have available, even if we allowed him to consume the whole parcel south of the substation as needed. I guess one thing, Nick, I didn't ask you, how far to the west do you think we go minimal? I know you're.
Yeah, it's only like, so there's a transmission pole that's right next to like 27 feet.
Oh, so.
It's gonna be before that pole, so it's not gonna extend that far. No, they literally needed to add, I think it was 15 feet, so I think overall, the fence is gonna move 20-some feet to accommodate the spacing they need.
I just didn't want us encroaching and having an imperfect intersection there from the north on Fairfield.
It's gonna be
there,
before
so.
that pole.
Okay, no issues there, so. That's all I got. like I said, plow forward and do the best you can with what we got to work with, I guess.
Okay. Is there any old business? New business? If not, motion by Groton, second by Coons to adjourn. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried.